Welcome to the Art Colony, a podcast about art and art history in Provincetown. My name is Gaston Lacombe. Provincetown is a seasonal town. If you come here in the summer, you'll see tens of thousands of people, bars and restaurants on nearly every block, and more shops than one can visit during a week-long vacation. However, in the winter, about 3/4 of these businesses close down, since only a couple thousand residents remain here for the off-season. So in the spring, it's with a bit of trepidation that we walk up and down Commercial Street to see which businesses will return after the winter break. Most reopen and resume operations. Some move to other spots in town, and some disappear forever. But there's one store in Provincetown that has been reliable for the last almost 50 years. One store that we can depend on year after year, and that's Womencrafts. One of the oldest businesses in Provincetown, Womencrafts' mission is to promote the work of female artisans, authors, and musicians. And to talk with us today about the illustrious history of Womencrafts is Michelle Axelson. Welcome, Michelle.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
So let's start by talking about who Michelle is. Who's Michelle Axelson?
That's a great question. I am a local. I live in Provincetown. I've lived here for 15 years. Prior to moving here, I was a clinical social worker in Boston in the queer community. I'm a wife. I am a dog lover. I'm a good friend. I'm an activist in town. Yeah, really in love with living in Provincetown. I'm a feminist, first and foremost, I would say, I guess.
Well, that's great. And you have been with Womencrafts for how long?
15 years.
You're the owner, right?
Yep, I've owned for 10 years.
Okay. So tell us, what is Womencrafts?
Womencrafts, I would say, first and foremost, is a community center. At least that's how I like to think of it. It is an intersectional, feminist, and queer book and gift store in Provincetown. The books are paramount to our importance. We grew up and I'm sure we'll get into this, in the second wave feminist movement of women-centric bookstores. So that is at the core of who we are, but we also feature art and jewelry and cards and fun things. But we're a gathering space. And yeah, I can talk more about our longevity is related to kind of the feeling that people have in that room. We are, a quintessential safe and welcoming space.
So let's go back to 1976.
Okay.
That's when it all started.
It did.
So what was the impetus? Why was the store started, and what did it look like back then?
Yeah.
Tell us more about it.
Yeah, I think for people who are familiar at all with second wave feminism and the Lavender Menace, which was a movement of lesbian feminists, 1976 is kind of a pivotal year. Many things were born in that year, including Michigan Women's Music Festival and many other bookstores. Womencrafts is probably around the 5th lesbian feminist bookstore to open, but it was women who were wanting space of them for themselves. They were noticing the lack of representation. As we think of Provincetown as an art colony, it leads the question, how many female artists are shown in galleries? How many are represented? How many, the Guerrilla Girl movement from New York would go into museums and notice there are 500 pictures of naked women. How many are painted by women? How much work by women is made? And this was a similar feeling of, when are women going to get their due in terms of art? And so the name Womencrafts also is a political, cultural statement on the fact that women's work is often looked at as craft.
Okay.
And craft maybe not deemed as important as art or as fine or as talent-driven, and certainly not paid as well. So the goal was to emphasize works made by women, to get women paid, to support female artisans. In 1976, there was a couple, Vashti and Alex, who moved to Provincetown with this goal. They're going to start this store. And they did their own level of artisan work. One of them was a woodworker. But they wanted to be in the movement of women's books. And so with that came what it would have looked like were publications by lesbian press. Um, again, that mid-70s period is a really pivotal moment for what happened in stores like Womencrafts. And there were the community that supported it. So there were the shoppers, there were the publishers, there were the authors, there were the women's music circuit, and they kind of all coexisted and worked really well in supporting one another. And so the shop from 1976 to 1990 was down near where Pepe's is now. It's the back of Bowersock Gallery was under glass framing. Before that, there's been many things there, but Womencrafts was one of them. And their window faced out to the Johnson Street parking lot.
So it's just like a block and a half from where you are
it's almost diagonally across the street. The original address was 373, and we're now 376.
Okay.
So they were there until 1990, and then they moved diagonally across the street to the building that we're in now. So yes, there would have been pottery. I know that they had like gym socks that said Dyke, or a sweatband that had the double Venus symbol, the double women symbol. And it just was this wake up for women to see, oh my God. And this is what the shop still does. And this is what Provincetown does so well, I think, is like representation makes us know ourselves more. When we can see ourselves, or when we can see someone or something, we can also be those things ourselves. So having music that is a woman singing about a woman. We can all juxtapose and switch around lyrics for our love, whether it's sung by the same genders we're referring to or not. But to have it be specifically made for women by women was really important. And then in the 70s, because lesbians were being pushed out of the feminism movement, and there was a fear in feminism that you're all just dykes. And so that was thrown around at any woman who was calling herself a feminist, such that some of the leaders, including Betty Friedan, worried. And so Betty Friedan famously worried about the scare of the lavender menace. And so lesbians reclaimed that title and did a lot with it. And one of the things they did with it was create their own spaces.
So can you tell us more about, you named two women who were the original founders. Can you tell us more about them?
I can tell you a little bit. I mean, what's interesting about something that's been around for 50 years is that Womencrafts, our sign says established 1976. And I joke that I also was established in 1976 because I was born in June of 77. So I certainly have never met the original owners. And often when people think of Womencrafts longevity, they think of Carol and Joey. They were the owners for the longest period of time. And that's from like a year and a half in. So Alex and Vashti, and I actually just had the opportunity in the shop last week to meet Vashti's granddaughter, who knew nothing about the Womencrafts history until her grandmother died.
Wow.
Because it was such a small part of her life. And what I talk about is that decisions they made in 1976 certainly changed my life today. But the generations of women who have come through the shop, the bravery of that moment, and the feeling of being a pissed off feminist dyke, I don't feel hyperbolic when I say it changed the world. Like people who made those decisions changed the world. And even though it wasn't for them, and owning a business wasn't necessarily for them, what they did was they became a spot that people sought out. So I say that there was this lesbian passport that people would have, and you would get a check, and this is all theoretical, you would get a check mark for going different places. So within the culture, it was known, go stand physically in Womencrafts and you're going to be offered a dyke discount, and then you get a stamp on your passport. And that meant things to people.
Oh, wait, you had physical passport?
No. But mentally, the idea of there's so few places that people would voyage, and just like we know why people travel to Provincetown today, but think about it before advertising for lesbian spaces, before, that people sought out and found Provincetown or Key West, the end of the world places, because they knew a story from a friend that if I go there and if I stand inside, I can find books that are about us. And at the end, when I go to pay, they're going to ask me if I want the dyke discount. And for some women, that question and their answer is their coming out story. So it was that important to people. And it was their decision in the 70s to do that in a way that created community around them. So similar today, I would say the community of shoppers and clients at Womencrafts are my friends, are my peers, are my community. And for them, their biggest customer were Carol and Joey, who lived in the Bronx. And immediately after their first shopping haul, they were being asked, don't you want to buy this? maybe you guys would be better owners. Maybe this is actually your passion and not ours, because it turned out that it wasn't Alex and Vashti's passion.
Mm-hmm.
But the fortunate thing is that so many stores, particularly bookstores, open and close. And there's a really beautiful history of women's bookstores and feminist bookstores. And one of the points of the store, like as a social worker, we sign a code of ethics that say it's our responsibility to make ourselves irrelevant, to work ourselves out of a job, that really work is about community.
Okay.
And so I think of the shop as having a similar belief system in our mission. And our mission is that women get represented and they get paid. And if that were accomplished, the store would no longer need to exist. And 50 years later, the store still needs to exist. And so what could have happened along the way is a couple breaks up and a store closes. The book business is really hard to sustain and they close. Different factions, Provincetown becomes too expensive and they close. All of that. Why that didn't happen is they didn't want to do it anymore, but they wanted the shop to exist. And so I'm grateful that I had the opportunity to meet Vashti's granddaughter, because it brought her reality into the shop more, because as shorthand, I refer to Carol and Joey as the original owners. And in fact, that's not true. One thing that I learned from Vashti's granddaughter is that Vashti's granddaughter, who I met, Brittany, her father, Vashti's son, experienced not having a mom. By the time he was 10, his father was raising him. Now, again, think about when this would have been. Lesbians couldn't be parents. You couldn't get a divorce and go in a same-sex couple and raise a kid. So there's a generation of kids that perhaps feel abandoned by their family. But who knows on the other side of the story? And this is all supposition because her granddaughter doesn't know and I don't know. But what choices were there? To be your full authentic self and live in the world honestly, to hurt your family. The choices that were made back then all coincide with how Womencrafts was born in relationship to what was going on in a family. That this place, this thing that so many people know for over 50 years, the woman who started its family didn't even know she did it.
That's really interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah. You mentioned that art made by women was considered to be artisan, not necessarily art.
Right.
So what was in the shop at the beginnings and all through the 80s as well?
Yeah. A lot of pottery, some nudes.
Nude paintings?
Sketches, maybe more.
Okay.
Also just considering the wall space and that there would have been T-shirts on the wall and albums and books. We've never had, gallery space per se. Work made out of glass, work made out of wood. I'm picturing like statues of women's busts, things like that. There was an artist that made this really interesting, like mother and child sculptures and two women interwoven. Jewelry was a big deal all along, particularly before marriage was legal. Same-sex couples weren't necessarily walking into Tiffany's to buy rings, but they would come to Womencrafts and buy a Jane Iris ring. Jane Iris jewelry we've carried since at least 1980 and still do today, and very lesbo-centric. And things that, like, when I first started working in the shop 15 years ago, there were things in the store I would look at and wouldn't necessarily say were my taste. And so if I just walked in one day, looked around, took out the things I didn't like, and then carried on, I would have missed a whole lesson in lesbian subculture. And so the privilege of standing behind the counter is having the women come for years. I just got an email this week about somebody who lost their ring that they bought 40 years ago. And do I possibly know the jeweler? And I do. But when you've been in business for 50 years, you think about how old the jeweler would have been when she made the ring 40 years ago. She's probably either not still alive or not still working with her hands in that way. But yeah, the art was primarily, again, craft.
And what is it today? What sort of art do you have in there today?
All of those same things, but something that has changed since I've owned the shop and in a relationship that I have. My dear friend is an artist who lives in town, Jo Hay, and she's a portrait painter. And we carry and collaborate on a series called The Persisters. And it's the originals are in the shop, and they're
large.
They're large. I was going to say, you're a painter, you know the dimensions better than I do. Maybe like 3 feet long, 5 feet by 3 feet, maybe.
That sounds about right.
That's probably right for them. And they're, for people who don't know, you should go check out Jo Hay's art. but it's a series that has Rachel Maddow, Hillary Clinton, Stacey Abrams, Letitia James. There's almost
Elizabeth Warren,
everybody.
Greta Thunberg,
Ibtihaj Muhammad, AOC, Ayanna Presley, Billie Jean King, Brandi Carlile.
But you don't have all of them in the store.
No, we rotate 6 at a time.
Oh, okay, so you own, but I mean, all of them are at the store. You don't necessarily own them.
All of them are either at the shop or at Joe's gallery, Joe's studio. So Joe is a friend of mine, and she closed her gallery before COVID. And when Elizabeth Warren was in the primaries, Joe stood in front of Town Hall on voting day with the Elizabeth Warren portrait. And I went to talk to her and just comment on her work. And we talked about that. So that would have been in 2019. So we talked about how 2020 was going to be the 200th anniversary of the women's right to vote, and how, not 200, 100. And wouldn't it be nice for the shop and Joe to collaborate? Now, as the owner of this shop in town, where I'm proud that we have a low price point in comparison to the rest of Commercial Street, and I've been sensitive to including us in the gallery stroll and art walk. And, just like there is this perception of women's art or craft, I would say I buy into that as well in terms of how I think of the shop. And so I have many friends, female friends in town who are painters, but I don't often think to say, you should carry your work at Womencrafts, because I want them to be paid what they deserve. And people don't think of the shop that way. And so Joe, to me, she was Cape Cod Artist of the Year a few years ago, and she has a beautiful legacy. She's having a show at PAM, a really respected artist, not as an insult to Womencrafts, but just as a reality base of getting what you're worth and who sees work what way based on which door they walk through. I wouldn't want to insinuate that the work shouldn't be somewhere grander. And my relationship with Joe has really turned around what I think about that, because having her work at Womencrafts has enabled so many more people to see it, so many more people to interact with it, people who maybe can only afford to come to Provincetown for a day. And at my shop, they know they can buy a $4 sticker or a $2 button or a $15 book, and they get to be in the presence and interact with a painting that otherwise would sell for $40,000. And because we're not selling the original, they can have a relationship to the painting and then buy a button of the painting or a print that may be a higher price point for my shop, but for a nice piece of art is not that expensive. So the importance of this work, and Joe and I talk about it a lot, is that each of the women that she paints know about the paintings and have access to use them for benefits or events. We've used a lot of them, and a lot of the women have signed the originals. And owning them and having them available has allowed that in really beautiful ways. Joe and I went to Ms. Magazine's 50th anniversary at Smith College, and we brought the portrait. And during the discussion, it was on the stage. Things like that has something to do with Womencraft stature and in the larger community, and feminism and scholarly things that aren't necessarily the art world. Has benefited Joe's paintings, and Joe's paintings have benefited the shop. And I would argue they've benefited the community.
Oh, absolutely. They're really beautiful portraits.
Yeah, she's very talented.
I think anybody in town has seen them at some point because they have been very present.
Yep.
Yeah. And they also link with your store's great heritage of political activism.
Absolutely.
It's been there since the beginning, and it's still going on now.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I say that the paintings have a conversation with the rest of the shop. So with Amanda Gorman's painting, we have her poetry books, and with her poetry books, we have buttons that talk about, and having people come in the shop and engage with the paintings and talk about them, I'm able to engage in the politics of the person and watching. There is the relationship and the reaction people to have to the beauty of her art, which is she's a stunning colorist, and the way she mixes paint is gorgeous, and her application is really, really great. And also people are like, holy shit, I want to look in the eyes of Rachel Maddow and say thank you. Well, Christine Blasey Ford is maybe one of the most powerful ones who has hung in the shop. And for Womencrafts, and going back to the way in which we're a community center, when Brett Kavanaugh was testifying to be, sworn in as a Supreme Court nominee, people gathered at the shop to watch. And then I was deciding, this would have been in October, so it wasn't high season. And so I can make the choice to be open or not. And personally, those hearings were really traumatic. I think for most women I know, certainly anybody who's ever been sexually assaulted, that was a really painful thing to watch. And it's a decision about, do I want to be alone or do I want to allow space for other people? And so in choosing to stay open, people came, and I describe it to people, this happened when RBG died also, is that it feels like when something hard happens, people know to come to Womencrafts, like kind of magnetically. And I'm not announcing like, come by, they just do. And people bring pastries. Sometimes when RBG died, it felt like people came to sit Shiva at Womencrafts, and just to be together. And in that, and in those conversations and in that togetherness, activism is spawned and created. And what are we going to do? Like, how are we going to react? And in that time, my reaction was, as a social worker, as a woman in this world, as a friend to many people, like, we're going to go do this level of protest. We're going to do this level of things that I'm not going to talk about because they're illegal. And Jo painted a painting, and she painted Christine Blasey Ford, and we hung her in the shop. And I put out a book in front of it that people could write a message to her that we sent to her. And people could like have a minute with it, almost like, she didn't die, but it felt like hope and belief in the system and in the Supreme Court died a little bit that day. And the feeling that women are going to be safe and that it's okay to speak up and that it's worthwhile to name predators. Having a place where people can come is really powerful. And I think this about our books too, that I'm so grateful for young queer kids that you can get a book online about any topic, and it can be a secret from your parent, it can be a secret from your partner, it can just be your own thing, and that they can find community online that's life-changing, life-saving for kids all over the world. But I will never say that brick and mortar stores don't matter, because coming into a physical space and seeing, it's not 1/4 of a shelf at Barnes & Noble that has LGBTQIA+ / maybe also women / maybe also other minority groups. It is a whole store dedicated to not only women, but primarily queer people. And seeing people react to that daily reinforces the need for it.
I really felt that when bookstores started closing. I love to go. When you shop online, you look for one specific book.
Right.
But when you go to a shop, a brick and mortar shop, you see that one specific book, but you see all the ones next to it.
Right.
That's when you really learn, and you get to find out so much more that you didn't know existed. And I think that's really valuable.
I think so too. And I'm not a huge shopper myself, and I have never in my life been in the position to have a lot of exposable income. But when I see people, and when I understand why bookstores go out of business because of places like Amazon, I also know that you can go into a bookstore and take pictures of all of the books you want to then go home and buy on Amazon. Like, what you're doing is eliminating the place that has curated books for you for so long. And what you will lose is for example, when 50 Shades of Grey came out and was really popular, that's a straight erotica book. But it was the best-selling book of that year, and it was written by a woman. And I didn't own Womencrafts yet, but I worked there. And so for the women who owned it before me, I said, oh, are we going to carry this book? And we had this long conversation. And for anybody who's seen the TV show Portlandia, there's a woman's bookstore, a feminist bookstore on Portlandia that people always come in and say, oh my God, you're the store from Portlandia. And there's like a joke and a being made fun of element with that, that so long as I know I have a sense of humor about it, I'm cool with. But there is an episode of that of like, do we actually support that? Do we want to sell best-selling things? And it's so curious because similar to like carrying women who aren't represented other places, I carry work by people that then might go on to get a contract with like the Sundance catalog or something, a Potter or Uncommon Goods. And then they become too big for us because I only buy from handmade by women. So once somebody moves to the next level of production, they might not have the most ethical practices, and good for them, they're moving on in their career, but in fact, who we're supporting are not the best-selling people. So to have that conversation about a book was really funny of like, so do we want to be the store that actually fucking sells anything? Or, and my argument with the previous owners was selling that book means that we can then highlight Jeanette Winterson, who for many lesbians is our first encounter with eroticism, who's actually a brilliant really intelligent writer, and that's literature. So we can sell this fluff and say, if you like this, you may also like this. And in the process, be highlighting a lesbian feminist author. And that's what we're talking about that would get lost.
And I was going to ask you, how do you select what goes in your shop? So you've already started the answer.
Yeah.
Do you want to elaborate more on that? How do you select what goes into Womencrafts?
That's a good question. I mean, in terms of in general, I'll say that I inherited a legacy of what was there. So I grow from there. Books are my passion, and I don't do it by catalogs or even what's released today necessarily. But I follow, before influencers were influencers, there are certainly people who influence me. So I follow my favorite authors and who do they like? I follow for example, Michelle T was just teaching at the Fine Arts Work Center. She's a fabulous author, awesome feminist, radical queer. And she always posts like her 10 favorite books. I'm like, oh shit, what if I didn't know that book? Or what about this person? There's other stores that I really respect too, or and a section of the shop that's really important to me is having trans and non-binary authors. And so, like as a therapist, I look through channels of what are therapists recommending to clients. So I spend a lot of time, particularly in the winter, just like going down rabbit holes. And then the different places that I order books, they do have recommendations, but it's actually pretty individual and very like thoughtfully done. There's maybe the bread and butter section of Womencrafts is lesbian fiction, which I call like the Fabio books for lesbians,
Okay.
kind of like a very quick beach read, not necessarily literature. And those authors are friends of mine, women I support, a system that I believe in, that publishing, and that the customers definitely love.
So can somebody, let's say an artist or somebody who makes something out of textile or wood or anything, can they just come up to you at Womencrafts and say, hey, I have this product here. Do you want to consider it?
They can, and they certainly do. And I don't know about your experience in your gallery.
Yes, I get that in my gallery all the time.
And that it can be a painful moment, right?
Yes.
Like because, and particularly the part of me that's a social worker first and a people pleaser second, and maybe a business owner sixth. I never want to hurt anybody's feelings. But it is often how I do find really good things. My biggest suggestion to people when they're kind of cold calling in the summer is that the summer is really not a time to get my best attention, that I do most of my shopping in the winter, and emailing is a better way to communicate and showing me your art. But the truth is that there have been women. This is a great example. So I don't know if you know, below Womencrafts is Radiance Art Gallery.
Yes, I was going to approach that. They're good friends of mine, and actually I do a lot of printing for them.
Oh, wow.
So yeah, let's talk about Radiance Art Gallery.
So Radiance Art Gallery is owned by Myra Coy and Kate Wallace-Rogers, but Myra was a customer of Womencrafts. And so before she and Kate met, I met her many years ago with her then wife, Leonore. And she walked in the shop, and here's this sexy Black woman, butch, wearing this really interesting bow tie. And I just was complimenting it, and it turns out she made the bow tie, and it was out of lucite, and really interesting, and certainly looked really good on her. And I was thinking like, oh, actually, we don't carry any bow ties, and we don't carry ties, and that's totally a dykey thing. And here's this personality that just radiates, as is the name of the shop. And so I started that connection with Myra, and she wasn't soliciting me, I solicited her. I mean, I didn't anticipate that she made them, but that has been the case several times with jewelry in particular. I get the most people checking in about books. Will you carry my book? And I'm always happy to give someone's new book a chance. But with Myra's work, so Myra and I became friends, and then she started to come back around Provincetown more often, and I noticed that she was hanging out a little bit with my friend Kate. They became a couple, and when Myra reached out to me just as a friend 2 winters ago to say, will you sit down with me and talk with me about owning a business in Provincetown? And we had this conversation, and my wife and I needed to, and were gratefully able to purchase. I've owned the shop since 2015, but I was put in the position to need to own the whole building in order to keep the shop going.
That's also on my list of questions here. We can get back to that later, but I wanted to talk about that.
But so we then owned the basement and what was going to be in the basement, and we had a renter who was just using it for storage, and that wasn't sustainable price-wise for them, needed to be something else. And it is a gallery space. So when Myra reached out to me to talk about owning a space, my wife and I have talked always about, being stewards of, I think of myself as a current steward of Womencrafts. I hope I'm not the last, but I hope I do it the rest of my working life and that I can help nurture whoever does it next. But in terms of the building, it's been really important to own a building as women in town because that's happening less and less. And like foundationally, that corner of Pearl and Commercial, having it be women, and, our hope for the basement long term is more of an actual community center or drop-in center, something that could be a safe hangout for kids, a place that could host poetry readings and 12-step meetings or, things like that are in my background. And my wife was a Unitarian Universalist minister that would use both of our skill set, but feasibly, realistically, financially, we can't do that yet. But so our goal was that whoever is in that space kind of matches the mission of Womencrafts. So Myra and I sit down as friends to talk about the realities of doing business in Provincetown and looking at this person who I already love, and I love her work, and I certainly love her partner, and thinking about the representation of women in Provincetown, let alone women of color, what a gift it would be if we were together. So she didn't even know I had space available. But I said, I want to have this conversation with you without me having any needs or expectations or hopes, but I want to share that our space is going to open up, and it would be such a gift and a privilege to be together. And it happened to have worked out. And so to carry the mission of the shop into everything that goes on in that building is really my happiest thing. And the way in which I want Womencrafts to represent women, an accountability check that, like when I was doing some anti-racism work on myself, realizing some accountability that we all need to do, I thought of the experience I had working at a queer community health center in Boston and how we didn't just get to check off we're diverse because we're queer, because if the major majority is queer, where else are we diverse? Where do our intersections come into play? And we don't get credit, for being the good guys. And then using that lens to look at Womencrafts and say, so we've been so committed to that women write many more books than men. But the truth is still at most major bookstores, women aren't face out on the shelf. That's a big difference in whether or not you make money and you sell. And women aren't published at the same rate. So at Womencrafts, that's going to happen. Great, check. But if your default is only women, how good of a job were we doing with women of color? How good of a job are we doing with trans and non-binary voices? How good are we doing with Native American voices? So that has become a real big priority of mine, that whenever historically, if I'm buying classic books and older books, the truth is that the ones that were published were written by white women. But if I'm buying a title that is new, when I do my book orders, that at least 50% are women of color or trans folk, because otherwise, what the hell is this store even about in terms of intersectionality? I'm saying all of that to say that having women and a woman of color gallery below me is really special and important to me. And it also represents what a shame it is in Provincetown that there is no other gallery that's owned by a person of color. So as thrilled as I am that it's at 376 Commercial Street, it also, these absences or lacks also highlight when people come into Womencrafts and they're like, this is such an oasis. It's a relief. Where do women go in Provincetown? I'm so grateful to be that place, and I'm so sad that it's notable.
Mm-hmm. With the experience I've had with Radiance Art Gallery, I have found that they are very vibrant and they're really attract a lot of people.
Yes.
I've been seeing also through social media lately, they've been doing more poetry readings and exhibiting other artists. Yeah. And I think it's really meeting the mission of your building now.
Yes.
And let's talk about that. You own the building now.
Yes.
A couple of years ago, I remember I donated.
Oh, thank you.
There was what do they call these campaigns?
GoFundMe.
A GoFundMe campaign because you were put in a precarious position.
Yes.
What happened?
The previous owners of the building were ready to sell and graciously gave me the first right of refusal and opportunity to see if it were possible. In no manner of thinking did I imagine that was possible. I've never owned my own home. I've never owned my own physical retail business space. I own the shop. And I was in a relationship with my now wife maybe for about a year. And so the building consists of an apartment, which I was renting, the shop, which I was renting, and the basement, which the previous owners were using as their gallery space, studio space. And so we went into negotiation to figure out how it was possible. It was feeling pretty desperate, but I knew from COVID that people do not want to see stores like mine close. And that's not about me. When I watched businesses reach out for help during COVID, that did a lot for me in terms of shame and guilt about money and asking for help for something that is already a privileged position. But I watched businesses do it in a way that felt ethical and responsible. And I thought, Womencrafts, the rent that it pays itself based on the ownership of the building is less than many places in Provincetown. It is not a store that financially could support rent in the middle of town. And we've been in that space since 1990s. We're in the walls, we're in the bones. Like, it is a house, that houses the space. So the imagining not being in that space and the financial reality of it for not only the shop, but for where the fuck was I going to live? I'm sorry, I'm swearing.
It's fine.
Okay. It seemed like not only would the shop maybe need to close, but I would also have to leave Provincetown. And so what could we do? And looking at the success of places during COVID and the amount of people who shopped from me online during COVID and wrote messages, don't you ever close. If you're thinking of closing, you need to reach out and let people know. And the truest part of my heart and mind knows that queer people have each other as family because perhaps we know the best what it's like maybe not to have generational wealth passed on to us or community that way, and that maybe we are each other's family. And so in the spirit of feminist bookstores of the 70s and what they were trying to do for and with each other, that it was my responsibility to let the community try to help as well. And so we did put together a GoFundMe with a lot of help from Provincetown. I have a friend who's a nonprofit fundraising letter writer who helped us write it. I have friends that, participated in lots of ways to get it published. And I had friends helping me talk through the horror of asking for money, which is really hard for me.
It's not fun.
It's not fun. And to know that we were asking for money to help for the portion of the building that's the shop, that between my partner and I, we could get approved for a mortgage for our apartment. It's broken into condos, so it's 3 separate purchases. So we could get approved for the apartment condo. Okay, check. How the hell were we going to do the shop and the basement? And so the basement theoretically could sustain itself through rent. It's just about figuring out how to buy it. And then the shop. And so we were mindful of only asking for help that would impact the shop. And I don't remember what we set our original goal at, but these are all the things that I could cry about. And I knew some strategies of make sure you have people who are going to donate the first day so it goes up, but whatever day we announced it on a Tuesday, maybe that Friday. Oh, it wasn't even a Tuesday. It was like Wednesday to Friday. Between Wednesday and Friday, we raised $100,000. And within 11 days, we raised almost $50,000. And that is when I knew this is possible.
It's going to happen.
It's going to happen. And then the thing became, because we were only asking for help for the shop portion, people didn't know that once the GoFundMe goal was reached, that it was an automatic, definite going to happen. So people were so excited and cheering us on. And in the background, my wife and I were freaking out because it wasn't done. There wasn't another level to that because we had a short period of time to do it. And I had no idea that commercial real estate takes a longer time. Like there was no way Siemens Bank was going to work with us and close within the time period that the sellers wanted to sell. And so that meant looking for private loans. And again, like I had just heard a story of two businesses in Provincetown who were both owned by gay men that supported each other in this way, meaning one would hold the mortgage for the other's property. And it's a place we all know, but whatever. And that somebody told to me that if you actually looked in the books of who owns and what mortgages, it is not the name on the door. And so knowing that, I'm like, okay, but I don't know how, I'm not a person who operates at that level or in that world. So who are those people? And I knew who gave that mortgage to other men, but I know which men in this town have a lot of money, but for lots of reasons, primarily because we don't earn as much, and also because maybe women don't flaunt it as much. It was not clear to me who those women were in town that might want to help and support us. So a lot of people were working on our behalf. I did a lot of humbling myself to different people. And I will talk about this, and she would have been okay when she was alive, but she's passed away this year, Joy McNulty of the Lobster Pot. And I have had a nice relationship since I've lived in town. I love her very much. And one of her close friends said, you have to go sit down with Joy. And Joy gave us a loan that helped with the purchase of the basement, that we would do a private loan for her. And she completely signed off on the mortgage of all three buildings, like
That's fantastic.
at Siemens Bank. And she wouldn't take a lot of credit for that. And she wouldn't have liked me to brag about that at the time, about like what a risk that was for her. And I know she did it for many people, but she told me that somebody did it for her.
Mm-hmm.
She was a single mom moving to Provincetown as a newly out lesbian. What was she going to do? And somebody did that for her to help her start the Lobster Pot. And she was not going to let Womencrafts die. And so that was really huge. Two other people, well, three, but two other scenarios came into play. Barbara Clark, who lives in town, who also bought the Provincetown bookshop. She knew the story and came and talked to me like completely as a businesswoman. I gave her the emotional spiel about the shop, and she's like, that's great. You have to not be so ashamed to talk about money. Women need to talk to each other about money, and I have it and you need it. And this can be a business plan that is not some big act of charity, even though had she not done it, I don't know where we would be. It absolutely was really pivotal. So we have a private loan with her. And then the biggest donors to our GoFundMe, on the second day of the GoFundMe, there was a $15,000 donation with two names I didn't know.
Mm-hmm.
I'm like, who the hell would these people be? And I did a little research, and a friend said, oh, I directed so-and-so to your GoFundMe. I'm like, wow, that's really crazy. I didn't know who they were and why or how they had that money. And so after the GoFundMe had gone through and everybody thought we were all set, I had a day that I went with like my heart in my hand to like 3 different gay male couples and said, I don't know what I'm going to do. And like, they weren't in the position or able to help. And I thought, we're getting close to having to not do this. And so I was sitting on the front stoop of the shop, maybe crying, I don't know, talking to a friend. And these 2 women on scooters pulled up and they said, we wanted to introduce ourselves. We're Janet and Melissa. And I said, oh my God. And I can't believe that was such a kind and generous donation. Thank you so much. And talked about who we know in common. And they're like, well, how is it going? And I'm like, oh, okay. And I just was giving kind of the surface answer. And they're like, no, really. And I'm like, well, do you actually want to know? And they're like, yeah, that's why we're asking. And I said, well, unless we come up with another $300,000, it's not going to happen. And they looked at each other, and without communicating words, one of them said, okay.
Oh, wow.
And like on the front stoop, I was talking to a friend, Erin, my wife, was upstairs, like in the window. And I'm like, are you like changing my life in this moment? Like without even really fully knowing me. And that is Melissa Moore and Janet Kozloff, and their generosity and kindness like made it all. I mean, so many different women made it all possible. And when the GoFundMe started, there's people I know from the shop who are older women who don't buy online, who don't use credit cards, that I saw give a GoFundMe donation for $10. And I had to go in the back and cry about that.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's $15,000 and I had to cry about that. But it's all of the people, that really made this community moment and movement that to me said so much about what we want to make sure stays in Provincetown, not just Provincetown, but in queer spaces. I think another thing that helped our timeline is the closing of so many lesbian bars. And there's been documentaries about that. And we can all bemoan the loss of things after the fact. But if we're given the chance to do something about it before it happens, I hope I would choose to help. And so many people did. I think it's a testament to who our community is at its best, what we believe about women, what we believe about ownership in Provincetown, what we believe about what businesses we want to be here and not lose. So I'm so personally humbled and grateful for all of it. And I'm able to remove myself enough to say that's a beautiful commentary on the Provincetown and LGBTQ community.
It's a really wonderful story how all of that came together.
Absolutely. There was a day that I was in the shop, maybe this was before I owned it, and this woman was quiet. And, I'm not the type of owner that's like on top of people the whole time they're there. I certainly want to greet people and say hello, but I'm not interested in upselling or watching people. I have barely ever been shoplifted, and so I'm not going to live in a way in which I treat people that way, that I anticipate that. I just wouldn't even want to own a shop if I felt that way. But I'm conversational. And so my hope is to engage with everybody on something below the surface, because it's just so immediate how much we have in common and what happens. And so I noticed this woman, and she was being really thoughtful and quiet. And I just would say something here or there, and she was having a moment. So much of what we carry is emotional, and I was watching her reading. We used to have these things, these framed kind of stories that were woven fabric. And I was watching her read one that ultimately is about adoption. And I saw her reacting to it. And so I just, asked the next question. I think like one of the things maybe I'm good at is disarming people by asking really authentic and honest questions, and not to be nosy, but just to say like, it's interesting to me to know you. And so in the process of the conversation, I learned that she was in the shop to buy goodbye presents for everybody because she was dying.
Oh.
And so I spent, the shop was supposed to have closed, and I closed the door and just spent time with her and cried with her and talked about who each gift was going to be for. And the next year her daughter came in the shop, and I get to know her daughter, and I get to have been with her in that experience and in that moment. I had an experience, something that happens fairly often. I would say our transgender and non-binary book section is maybe used most by family members who want to know and want to do the right thing and be supportive. And I'm always, anybody who works at the shop, even, basically if you're related to me or my friend, you work at the shop. So anybody who's in that orbit, I make sure to say, we are never saying thank you to a parent who loves their kid. And we're never telling the kid that they're lucky that their parent loves them, because of course they fucking should. But we will handhold and we will direct towards literature and stickers and pins and things like that. And in that process, again, about a brick and mortar store is not only are the books on the shelf, but somebody standing behind the counter. In those moments, me, I worked on a transgender health team as a social worker, so I actually am knowledgeable and I can actually handle a conversation that might be hard for people to have, and I can initiate the conversation. And I had parents coming in asking for what I would recommend, and the dad was shy, and the mom, it was actually the stepmom, so it was the biological dad and the stepmom was more conversant. And just the more we talked, the more they shared that they were really scared that this kid would die, and the statistics about transgender kids committing suicide and maybe substance abuse had come into play, and what would I recommend? And so, yes, there were some like didactic books for the parents and info and all of that. And then there was a book of poetry I thought the kid should read. And then there were some pins. And I said, if you'll let me, I would like to write a vague post about this experience and ask for our community to write notes back to your kid. And that night I wrote, this is where statistics meets reality. there is somebody out there in New Hampshire that does not see themselves. And for lesbian and gay men, like there were times in our culture and our history that we didn't see ourselves. I didn't know a lesbian growing up. I mean, I didn't come out until after college. I didn't see myself, but thinking about a young trans kid in rural New England, and are they going to make it through high school? So like there's the easy things you can say to parents, or I'm going to grab your hand and help you fucking save this kid's life. Because if they can get past this period of their life, maybe they can live somewhere safer. Maybe they can come find us. Maybe they can know somebody else. And so it wasn't a business transaction for me. It was a 911 call to our community, and I could put it out to our community. And because Womencrafts has longevity and followers and people who care about us and each other, the dialogue that happened, was hundreds of messages of stay here with me. If you need a resource here, somebody in Donna Pomponio offered to paint the person. Like what of our community, what skills do we have? I don't know, but I already love you. And when those things happen, it also reminds me of when there's any strife in town or bitchiness between men and women and all of that. Like, I don't know a queer person that wouldn't lay down for a younger queer person
absolutely.
And to do something to help them. And so that moment happened, and the feedback on social media, on Facebook and Instagram. And then after that same time period, I had a hysterectomy in 2021. And the reason that's relevant is I actually talked a lot about it on my social media because it's something that people didn't talk about. Again, the things people don't talk about and people don't talk about with women. So I have a lot of cards in the store about periods and menopause and things like that. So the journey of my hysterectomy, I talked about on live Instagram. And while I was talking about it, I think I have a shirt, I forget what it says, like uterus free something or other. And I was saying, should I carry this shirt in the shop? It's for those of us that have hysterectomies, but it's also for, trans folks. And like, not every woman has a womb. And what does it mean to be a woman? And so I was having this conversation, and I feel like, and I hope that I'm always pointed when I talk about the shop of including trans people, because you can hear women and think that that means only one thing. And for me, that absolutely doesn't mean one thing. It includes as many trans and non-binary people who want to be included in that cover. But as I was talking about it and saying, like, I really hope really trans positive things, I was live, and the kid who we were writing those messages about started interacting with me and saying, like, thank your friends, thank this and just like the little moments that you can give something to a kid is really phenomenal. I see it in the shop all of the time, but I also see it with older women. Like when you talk about like what's a baby dyke, I always say it doesn't necessarily mean an 18-year-old. It might be a 61-year-old who just left her husband and finally knows who she is. And so like in terms
having her second teenage
absolutely
period,
or being new at something and being excited about something. And so like even just in terms of carrying books, I don't only carry books that came out now because people come to feminism at all different ages. People come to lesbianism or queerness at all different ages. So some of like the pivotal books, you can't assume that a 60-year-old read it. You might have to hold a 60-year-old's hand and say, you need to go home and listen to the Indigo Girls. And then once you're done with that, go back and realize who the fuck Chris Williamson is, and then have your mind blown, and then think, it happens with young people, but it happens with older women all the time too. I think like I've said in my shop, our shop, I think I've seen more couples kiss than I can imagine anybody who owns a regular retail store, because it's safe, because there's images and representation of love. Speaking of Chris Williamson, she historically during Women's Week did concerts at the Post Office Cafe and then came to Womencrafts afterwards to sign her CDs. And in the line, two different women who were at that concert and walked together to Womencrafts while they were in line to meet Chris Williamson. I saw them fall in love. And they come and visit me every Women's Week to mark the place and the time that they fell in love. And I have this beautiful connection with them, and it happened inside the store, and that's not unusual. Like I get, whenever I'm not in the shop, I wasn't in the shop today, and my friend Vicky is working, and Vicky's a retired school teacher. And we have this print that says, queer teachers make queer futures possible. All this stuff makes me cry. And so somebody was buying it, and Vicky's like, "Oh my God, I'm a queer teacher," and retired. And the person buying it said, "Well, I'm about to be. I'm a first year, and I'm coming to my classroom out as a trans woman." And they took their picture together, and the woman said she's comfortable sharing her picture. And I just think, like, that person I buy that art from is a non-binary person in New Hampshire. And to be able to tell them that their art changes my life on a daily basis, the person who's buying it, the person who's selling it to them, it's not a small thing.
No, it's not.
And that thing cost $8. So talk about women's art, talk about the art that Womencraft carries. I don't think that there's much that I sell that doesn't have an emotional, political, socio-cultural component to it.
I think that's just amazing. I mean, I knew you had a very important shop.
Mm-hmm.
I knew it was a very important center in Provincetown, but the stories you told me today were amazing.
Thanks.
And it also brings it home how art can be put into action.
Yeah.
It's not just pictures on the wall. It's not just a decoration.
Right.
You can use it, whether it's paintings or music or writings or buttons or whatever it is that you're creating. They can change people's lives, and that's so fantastic. And I'm really moved to hear all these stories about how you have put this art in action in your shop and how it's changed so many people's lives.
Thank you.
I'm so happy you came to talk to me today.
Thank you. I appreciate the opportunity.
And I hope we can talk again
I
at some
think
point.
we will.
Thank you so much. And thank you everyone for joining us.